So, well, I don't know if it's exactly a debate. It's not a this house believes debate. It's more, we were kind of talking about it and thinking it's an important topic, but do we want to sit around kind of saying, well, I agree. Well, actually, I agree. I agree with you. So I thought maybe we could just have a free-flowing conversation and find where we disagree civilly, or where we maybe disagree with ourselves, or don't really know, and just kind of explore it. So I suppose maybe a good way to start would be to say, like, if you had to kind of elevate a pitch, lift pitch, say, this is my stance, like in 2 sentences.
Oh, 2 sentences.
Well, it might just be, this is too complicated. I'm sorry, I can't talk about it, it's too complicated.
Okay.
I don't know, but we could maybe go down the line and just then might place people a little bit in terms of, so, Maya.
2 sentences, oh God.
Oh, well, you know.
Speak into the mic.
An Irish too.
Yeah.
Oh, it's racist.
Sorry. Cancel him.
Well, when HR emailed me and said, don't say exclusionary language, the first thing I responded was, I would, of course, respect other people's pronouns. And this was like really early on in my journey. So I said that, and therefore I had to stick with that for the past 4 years in public. In my head and in private, I have moved away from that position because I think it confuses things. If you call a man she, or if you call a woman he, and you're trying to be clear about what sex they are, it confuses things. In public, until very recently on Twitter, you couldn't misgender and get away with it. So I've got quite good at not using any pronouns at all. And when people ask me for advice, I say it's better to have a job than a good employment tribunal. So I wouldn't advise you to go around misgendering willy-nilly if you're in a situation where that could lose you your job.
What is willy-nilly's gender identity?
The willy gives it away.
Yeah, what does the nilly?
Am I next?
Yes.
So I too have moved, and when I was talking with my editor as we planned the book, I said, well, of course, if people, before transition, I thought I was being very daring, saying that before a historical trans person identified as trans, I'd call that person by their natal sex, and then afterwards by the pronouns that they had adopted. And I thought that was quite an out there sort of thing to say. And as I wrote, like more and more, and as I talked to people, I'm like, this is just a man. And the things that this person is doing, like if it's a male, I mean, are just so masculine that the story makes total sense if I describe this person as a man and no sense at all if I describe them as a woman. And often the other way around too. So more and more I found that I was confusing myself and confusing other people when I'd used anything except sex-based pronouns. So that's kind of like what I do. But I have a meta value that has become more and more important to me over the past 4 years, and that is free speech and open debate. And I think the absolute paramount thing that we need to do is to have people speaking about this. And I absolutely bloody hate the fucking pronoun police. All of them.
Me too.
All those women who pop up and say, hey, when somebody says she of a trans woman, would you fuck off? And the other way around, obviously, as well. Like, let people speak. And if somebody is scared to speak and maybe they just want to call a trans person by the pronouns that person uses, that's their bloody business. Let them do it. Or maybe they're so terrified to speak that the only way they're willing to is if they use preferred pronouns because they're scared to do anything else. Let them speak. And so I just feel whatever you want to do, you do it, and whatever I want to do, I'll do it. And Stella and I, for example, have had pleasant conversations about a friend of both of ours, a trans woman, and Stella said she the whole way through, and I said he the whole way through, and both of us agreed we were not the bloody pronoun police, and each of us can use what we prefer, and we will get on with it, and we will have our conversation, and we will exchange knowledge and move forward. So use what you feel best with using and speak.
I'm in violent agreement with Helen.
Oh, no.
But I gave 2 points there, so you can disagree with one of them.
No, it's a real difficult one. I mean, when we were cutting the video for Sex Matters, Mr. Menno and myself, and Mr. Menno is a purist who I constantly say she for trans woman. Katie Montgomery, I often say she said, and men will say, she's not she, he's a he. I said, well, really, does it matter? We're in an edit suite together. Is it going to change anything, how I refer to Katie Montgomery? And so I do slip into it. And I was thinking today that, we were talking about a film I made in 1999. It was for the millennium, believe it or not. And it was, one of the main characters was April Ashley, who was a major trans woman icon or whatever in the 60s and 70s. And of course, I was thinking afterwards, 1999 was before the Gender Recognition Act. There was no compulsion, but we just fell into referring to April as she. And I went back to the film, and it's she all the way through. But I never actually believed that April was a woman. But it was a courtesy because you're working with someone and you get to know them, and it would really have offended them. I also think the audience wouldn't have understood because they sort of bought into the idea that she was an icon. But I noticed recently with the whole relaxing of the rules by Mr. Musk, he, him, that how liberating it felt to be able to refer. I mean, I do now refer to Katie Montgomery mainly because he keeps trolling me and trying to annoy me. So I do refer to Katie Montgomery as a he now. For 2 years, 3 years, I was quite happy to call Katie Montgomery a she out of courtesy. And that's the other thing. I suppose there's these weird rules that if you're forced, if they say you will call me she, I think, no, I will not fucking call you she. But I will do it out of courtesy.
I mean, a man who says you will call me she is so masculine. Like, go perform your gender.
Stella?
Yeah, I kind of land very similarly, disappointingly, because I thought we were going to have a nice fight. But
So Irish of you.
I also hate the pronoun police, and I do have a lot of trouble with the pronoun police. I suppose I think there's kind of two types of people, and
Male and female?
yeah. And some get very, I don't know, get very swayed by pronouns. And I'm not them. And for instance, I've never found it difficult to have, let's say, a trans woman and to see them as male and to say she, her. It's never been the leap. It hasn't been rohypnol for me. It doesn't, it reminds me of, let's say, my husband is Henry and I'd be calling him Henry and my kids call him Daddy, and I don't slip into calling him Daddy. But I know lots of people, you know the way that happens.
That makes sense to me.
He's the daddy. We're learning more about Stella than we wanted to.
Where's Henry?
He's gone.
Daddy to you.
Well, that's escalated quickly.
And I find it easy to have that dual, and I think some people find it incredibly hard. And once they hear she, her, they've gone to the end of that sentence. They think it's a woman, it's female, and all the way. And I don't. I have some sort of thing in the back of my mind where I haven't. So I've never got in any level intense about it. What I do get intense about is terriers at my heels harassing me about she, hers, and he, hims when I've barely noticed them, and I've never been in any doubt who was male and who's female. It just hasn't been something that has thrown me. So I think that's a very interesting thing. We do want to welcome conversation from the ground. So Sue wants to come in, so let's let her. Make sure you say who you are.
Yes.
You don't need to use your pronouns.
I wouldn't say what. Oh, it's not working. Hang on. Could we have the mic live, please? Sorry.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Sue Evans. It's really interesting, and sort of mostly I'm sort of nodding along. And then I thought of a couple of things just now which occurred to me. One is I do think there's an issue around, because I think you were saying, Stella, when you're with someone or when you're kind of aware of someone, and then there's not a sort of, you can go along with the cognitive dissonance.
Well, when they say the word trans woman, I connect.
Yes.
Male uses
Yes.
she, her.
So
know,
I think
the 3 points.
So one of the difficulties that I've really noticed in the press, for example, when I have not a clue who the person is being reported
Great
on.
point. Yeah.
So when they describe the woman did this and the woman did that, that is when I do think there is more of an issue around the clarity. And I think as a society, I mean, it's gone both ways, but I do think that that's something that needs to be clarified so that we understand sex and if someone is being discussed in the papers. But the other thing, which is more my area, which I just wanted to say, and it's often a thorny issue, I think, in clinical work, which is people say, what do? You know, do you affirm the name and do you affirm the pronouns and so on? And I think when I was working in the GIDS at the Tavistock, that was something that came up, and it was a real issue, and it was one of my first arguments, because a GP wrote a letter and referred a boy, let's call him John, 16-year-old boy, and after I'd done the assessment, I wrote back to the GP, and even though I knew that John liked to be called Jenny, and I put in the letter to the GP, dear so-and-so, I have seen the patient John, the 16-year-old boy, who likes to be known as Jenny, but I was told I had to write back to the GP and call him a girl and call him Jenny. And I really held out on that because I said the difficulty is with children, we're trying to work out where their confusion and their distress and disturbance is coming from. If we all get mixed up about who they are, I think we've got a problem. So it wasn't that I put it in the face of the patient, and I think Marcus and I always say, don't get into massive arguments, like work it out with your patients as you go along, really. There's no hard and fast rules, I don't think. But I certainly think clinically, and you might find that in other issues medically, that I think there does need to be clarity about sex.
Yeah.
Alasdair said I could come in on what Stella said. I was talking to a 17-year-old the other day, and he was telling me about a girl in his class who's recently started to identify as a boy, he, him. And the teacher said something about girl to this child and then remembered and said, oh boy, you know, like boys do such and such. And I said, well, what did you think of that? And this is a kid I would call gender critical, but he never says that to other children of his age. And what he said to me was, it's really easy for me to look at a girl and think that's a girl who calls herself he, him, and remember to use he, him. But the word boy was just impossible. So because you don't use the word boy or girl of your classmates, but you do use he, him, she, her. So I think children of that age have got very, very good at thinking that there's boys who are he, him, and boys who are she, her, girls who are he, him, and girls who are she, her. And they can navigate that while remembering what sex the kid is and just knowing that the pronouns are kind of just a thing you have to do.
And the theys.
And the theys, of course, yes.
I want to speak now. Sorry. I want to... This might be a bit weird and unexpected, which is maybe a good thing. So I'm a typologist by training, and typology is language comparison. So you compare different languages and you work out implicational universals. If a language does X, it will do Y, because there's no language which breaks that rule. And I want this might sound complete bonkers and contribute to the mad person at the bus stop theme I'm developing. But I just want to talk you through something really quickly. I saw a tweet which said, yes, I have she, they pronouns in my bio, but I would have thought out of courtesy that you would call me they until you knew me.
Yeah.
Now, has anyone here worked in a French-speaking or German-speaking or Spanish-speaking country? Okay. So how is that any different from... Because actually, you do find inappropriate... Now, that's the second person. That's the difference. It's the second person, not the third person. That's the difference. But, you know, if you work in that environment... I remember a day when somebody came in and she was outraged and she was like, this pupil's just called me tu. It's disgraceful. And it really matters, actually. It's not some weird social convention. Give me a second. Let me finish the point. It's actually about, like, it could be nepotism. It could be favoritism. So if I'm married to somebody, let's say, and we're in an audience of 200 people, it's often appropriate to use the formal pronoun, not the informal one, because you don't want people thinking you're giving your partner special treatment, for example. So how is that different?
So you're talking about tu and vous.
I'm saying that it's like tu and vous. Can I just... Sorry,
Yes, yes.
And then there was another one, which was a particular Laurie Penny. And she said, I'm they... at work, but when I socialise, I'm she. Now, there's all sorts of implications for that for feminism, but how is that different from vous and tu? So what does that mean? So gender, I would argue, sorry, I'm going to try and make this quick. Gender is the epiphenomenon. It's what's going on now in this society, in this culture. What they're doing is they're slowly reintroducing a formality distinction into our pronominal paradigm. That's what's happening. So you see young people saying they to mean somebody whose sex I know, who doesn't have some gender, just to mean not in my circle. Now, why would that happen? Why does that happen historically? Why do languages reformulate their pronominal paradigms to introduce formality distinctions? We don't know. But I suspect that suddenly you've got a black device on the end of your hand and you can talk to anyone in the world. You want walls around you. You want protection. You want formality. You want structure. Don't call me that. I'm not ready for you to call me that. You don't have the proximity towards me. Technically, formal and informal pronouns are called social distance before COVID took that term from us. It's social distance. It's saying no. And I think that's what these young people, particularly these young women, are doing, is they're saying, I want walls, I want structure. There's too much coming at me, and I want some kind of safety. So actually, I'm they to you.
Okay.
I think it's the opposite of safety. I think
It's not
that the norm that it's this you must introduce your pronouns is trying to say nobody knows what sex you are unless they've examined your genitals or your chromosomes. That's what it's doing. It's trying to say unless somebody tells you they're a he or a she, you don't know. But we can all look around and see who's a he or she. And as a woman, whether it's a he or a she that's following you down the road, and what level of risk that involves. I think it's trying to break down those barriers of safety by saying that you cannot know until someone tells you.
Well, that's what it will do. There's no way it can't not do that.
I think it's also control. It's gender self-ID should be called gender bossing other people around to say what my ID is. It's not self, it's other.
Yeah.
Could I get I see Colin Wright has the mic. Could I hear what he has to say?
Yeah.
And introduce yourself.
Colin Wright, I'm an evolutionary biologist. I work for the Manhattan Institute. Nobody likes the pronoun police, and I try not to police anyone's pronouns. But we know that increasingly, like in schools and even workplaces, we have what I call is the pronoun rituals that a lot of people sort of lead, and they expect everyone, go around the room, everyone introduce your name and give me your pronouns. And I wrote a piece that said, we shouldn't participate in these pronoun rituals because I think it's like a Trojan horse for gender ideology. It's often like the first time that a kid will even think I have a gender identity that can be different than my body. And then once that seed is planted, then, there's trans ideology can easily set seed. So I wrote that piece, and everyone, a lot of people agreed, but the number one question I got was, well, what do I say when someone asks me for my pronouns? Mine was, don't answer, but a lot of times I think they prey on the social awkwardness of I'm not going to be the only one in the room. I'm just going to say, he, him, and then move on to the next person. But then you're tacitly participating. You're a node in the spread of the gender ideology unwittingly. So I'm interested in what each of you would say when you're asked in a very public setting, where it's not like a welcoming crowd like this. What would you say when you're going around and it gets to you and they ask?
Question.
I'm not religious.
Yeah.
What about you, Maya? It's a good question.
Yeah.
What would you say, Maya?
Nobody ever asks me. But Sex Matters does have a guide to pronouns, and we basically say treat it like religion. If you were in a room and people were praying and you don't pray, you just don't partake. Or if you don't drink alcohol, you just don't partake. You just say no, thank you, or not for me, unless you want to say something funny and provocative, in which case go ahead. But you know what you're doing.
I mean, I say, I haven't, of course, no one's going to say it to me either, but I generally say to people, free speech is a cardinal value of mine, so I leave you free to use whichever words from me you think are most appropriate.
It's nice.
If somebody asked me what my pronouns were, I'd probably say, don't be a fucking idiot. but I wouldn't answer he, him. I mean, that's just absurd. And I think in schools, you're absolutely right. This whole ritual is training children to be dissociated.
Yeah, I would answer, I don't believe in forced speech or compelled speech. And I'd leave it at that. But I think the question is actually very valid, because I think people who are in positions where they could lose their job or they could lose a lot of opportunities to get promoted. You know what I mean? They would go no further. I think they are very, very worried about that. But I do think that now that we have a significant kind of movement together, I think there's an awful lot of resources of people. I remember there was a few amazing Mumsnet threads that said, you know, how to navigate the offices making us put she, her on the email, or, you know what I mean? I do think it's very important that people do push back as opposed to throw your hands in the air and say there's nothing we can do. I think there's plenty we can do. And that's one point I would say you definitely can stand your ground on that particular one.
Yeah, and maybe not in the meeting. Like, maybe the thing is, you know, either let it pass or say the she, her if you have to, but then go out to HR and say, look, you know, we do have the Forstater ruling. This isn't appropriate. You know, maybe you could think again about not having people do religious observances at the beginning of meetings. And I know people who've managed to get their HR people to take the compulsory pronoun field out of the email signature template that they have to use. That's much more constructive than outing yourself in a meeting.
Yeah. I think, Lisa...
I just wanted to make a really quick technical point, just as a nerdy academic linguist thing. I don't actually think they are technically pronouns anymore for two reasons. The first is that there's no language in the world which has an open class of pronouns. So if we're seriously saying je, we can add pronouns. Je, is a pronoun.
Yeah.
That stops being pronouns, because it's
They're
like
names.
prepositions. It's a closed class. To, under, before, that's it.
see.
I can't say fnog and just say that's a preposition now. So for that reason, but the second reason is it's really important actually, which is that it's easier in French because noun and name are the same thing. It is something, you get to use it as a stand-in for something of which you do not know the name. So if I don't know who you are when I see you walking past, I get to make the judgment. Because I don't know what your name is. You get to decide what your name is. So you can tell me your name is Captain Spanglepants. I have to use it.
I'm now calling her that forevermore.
But I don't have to. So in a way, what they're actually doing with this is getting rid of third-person pronouns. And just to complete the point, there are languages in the world without third-person pronouns. Japanese doesn't have third-person pronouns.
What do they do?
They...
Okay. Lisa said
15 minutes, Stella.
That's my question, because
Sorry, could you introduce yourself?
yes, Lisa Sellen Davis, gender nuance addict, equally hated by all different kinds of gender people.
I hate you.
So I get all my news and entertainment from Gender a Wider Lens, this is what I was going to ask, but that when I heard Rita Kertu Katiala, whose name I've been practicing, say that they didn't have pronouns in Finnish, and I thought I would pay to no longer use pronouns so that we just never had to talk about this incredibly indulgent thing ever again. Even though, as Colin says, it's not that indulgent because it's kind of a gateway to other ideas and belief systems, but. If we're reinventing language constantly now, as Alasdair's talking about, what about getting rid of pronouns? I mean, these other languages go fine without it. How many people would vote to get rid of pronouns just so we never had to talk about it ever?
Is Rita here?
She was definitely here earlier. Is she gone?
No, but I know a bit about Finnish pronouns.
I lived in Finland for 2 years.
They do have pronouns, but there's no he, she distinction.
There's no he, she.
Oh, are you Finnish?
It's not gender, it's
There's
non.
a Finnish person.
Get a mic.
Yeah.
Sinna, isn't it? He or she in Finnish?
Also in Chinese.
Rita Kertu is not here anymore at the moment. She will come later. But in Finnish language, we just have one pronoun, and it's female and male. So that has always been a little bit equality in Finnish.
But could I just say, I've heard Rita say, maybe I'm wrong, but they started, it was an influence of Americanization that they've been starting to youths have been starting to use.
Please don't say they.
She, her, they. Am I wrong about that? I thought Rita had said that basically she had seen the Americanization of the teenage.
In Finnish language, we have always had just a one personal pronoun, and this pronoun is hän. Hän, and this means female and
Okay.
male.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You have a third person plural pronoun, right? There's a third person plural pronoun. There's a they.
There is, yeah.
And so do non-binary Finnish people call themselves they in Finnish? I don't know.
Who knows?
This orange jumper.
Yeah, we've been waiting to hear about the Austrian.
Austrian?
Yeah, exactly. I'm Henry from Austria, and the thing is, in German, at least in Austria, sorry for the Germans over there, I'm imprinted with movies that take place like 130 years ago, or even further in the past, and the they in German is a feudal thing, like just imperials would be called they. So in German, they nowadays tried with it.
There's a universal metaphor which runs throughout all language, which is to complement is to aggrandize, and to aggrandize can be you can pluralize. So the royal we, the Queen saying the royal we. It's the whole thing.
No one would try that in German, in my understanding of German, to say my pronouns are
They, them.
They, them. Yeah.
Wow.
And on the other hand, I wanted to mention a short story from my childhood. I was the generation that tried to gender every noun in German. And in my family, when I was 15, I was terrorizing them with saying it in both genders, like male and female. Yeah? And nowadays, Austrian broadcasting does that all the time, but with the not lingually, what's the word for that? Beautiful way to say one word as the female, and maybe both, the male and female, but they make a gap in the word, which is a gap in the language, to imply the non-binary, which makes every sentence sound worse.
So you used to say Lehrerinnen, and now you're supposed to say Lehrerinnen.
Yeah.
In the pause, you contemplate the struggles of the.
Did you have a question?
Lehrer.
No.
Innen.
Yeah, I'd like to hear. Marcus has something to say about the clinical, because it is before he says it, it's a huge issue in the people in the clinical field. So often people email us saying, do we use the pronouns? Should we use the pronouns? Where do we land with the pronouns? It's a big deal.
Yeah, as a citizen, I'm freedom of speech. I hate the the police and all the rest of it. I can't stand it. But as Sue was saying, try not to get into an argument and actually try and avoid using names. Well, I was just thinking about a couple of points about the purpose of it. There's so much of a projection of confusion, isn't there? You know, the confusion's in you, she, her, him, her, and the identities change. So they're not confused. They're quite certain who they are. But you're confused because you've used the wrong term. So especially with adolescents, a lot of projection. And then I think Maya made the point about, or Helen made the point about control. Because, of course, all our identities are not so fixed. We're partly who we are. We're partly the way the world sees us. And that's under contest. It's as if I could say, I know who I am and you must see me the way I see myself. So there is that sort of tyranny of the object who is not free to have their own thoughts, and an attempt to fix the identity, as if all our identities were fixed. Of course, we're always in some sort of state of flux, who we are.
Yeah, I mean, and this thing of someone having a pronoun and them being able to get a third party to compel a person or to punish a person for not using that pronoun is the most authoritarian thing.
The thing I was really jealous about for Finnish when I listened to the episode in which Aretha was interviewed, the excellent episode on Gender, a Wider Lens, was how clearly that moment when people accept your new pronouns is a sort of crystallizing moment in a child's gender identity journey, as we're meant to call it, and how lucky the Finns are that that particular flashpoint isn't in their language. So there just isn't an issue of using the right pronouns because there are no right pronouns because everyone has the same third-person pronouns. And it seemed to me that it would be much easier to transition and detransition without it getting caught, getting stuck, because you haven't had to do that declaration, because the declaration of pronouns is the moment for the trans child.
That's got to be true.
I'm just going to say that, I mean, it's not the first time that people have used language as a sort of membership card to show that they're part of the tribe. I mean, accent, I mean, in Britain, you can tell everything about somebody from their accent. Immediately people know I'm Scottish or whatever. And I was reminded when I was at the BBC and I just started as a sort of rather sort of, tawdry working class person at the BBC, and somebody said, "And which school did you go to?" And I thought...
You wouldn't know it.
I thought, no, I was thinking, that's strange. But of course it meant something because they all went to private school. And so they were asking me basically Eton or Winchester. I was thinking they want to know Garnock Academy and Ayers.
I think there's a...
I just... Sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to say something to follow on Marcus's point. I think it's worth just bearing in mind that 100 years ago, when did you see people writing about you and when did you hear people talking about you?
Yeah.
Didn't really happen. Now you can go online and you don't have to be a big person, just a teenage girl in a friendship group, and you can see people talking about you. So the reference about you, third person reference, is becoming more and more important. You would never have, unless you nicked somebody's diary or unless you were so important that they wrote to a newspaper about you. When did you see somebody, when did the average person see somebody writing about them? That's gone now.
I think, would you Terry,
Yeah, just to pull together.
Just introduce yourself if you could.
Oh, sorry, yes, I'm Terry Patterson, Thoughtful Therapists. Pulling together the use of pronouns in the clinical setting and also the use of pronouns as a kind of test to see whether you adhere to the ideology or not. There's an organisation called Trans Health Liberation who did the map of influence that I think most of us are on. They've got a page on their website for potential clients to try and ascertain whether the therapist they're seeing is a conversion therapist or not. And the first thing that they suggest that you notice is when the therapist introduces themselves, do they introduce themselves with their pronouns and ask your pronouns? And if they don't, they're probably a conversion therapist.
Wow.
Stephanie has been putting her hand
I think
up
there's Stephanie has a question. This guy, and then over to Stephanie. Or Sarah, yeah.
I was just going to say a quick one for anybody Irish who is getting pressure in the workplace to add pronouns to the bio. Check if your employer is a member of IBEC, because IBEC, which is the Irish Business and Employers Confederation, they have 36,000 members in Ireland, and they're the biggest representative body. They did a policy with TENI last year. And in the policy, I've seen it, a few people here might have seen it, it says, the norm now is to get pronouns into your bio and to use pronouns. And it's been rolled out in 36,000 organisations. Now, whether those organisations have taken it and ran with it, I'm not sure. It hasn't been done where I work. But if you see it and you're not happy with it, I think get on to IBEC and go back to the source and say, look, I know that you roll this out in my organisation and I'm not happy. So... yeah,
very good.
Little tip. Just was going to say one thing about that. We get contacted a few times at LGB Alliance by firms or employees, and they say, "Oh God, there's pressure to introduce pronouns, and it's going to be in our emails and everything." And we have a general policy where, and it's worked with a couple of big companies. I got a gay managing director of quite a big firm was asking me, "What am I going to do? I don't want to come out as a TERF, and I don't want it to happen, but there's big pressure." And what he ended up doing was putting it out to a vote. He said, "It sounds like a great idea, but let's see what everyone else thought." And everybody voted against it. It was like 92% of his employees said, "Piss off." And then it was dead. And I think it's that
was a good idea.
That's very good.
A secret vote, secret
absolutely,
for sure.
Yeah.
I think Stephanie, make sure you say who you are, yeah.
Yeah, I'm Stephanie from Transgender Trends, and just a quick point about pronouns in schools, because this is happening in schools. It's part of the Queering the Primary Classroom project, and its aim is to disrupt reality for children. So I think it is really, really important that we challenge it in schools. It also disrupts language development, so speech and language development is really... Pronouns are really important for that, to understand a child's comprehension. And the other issue is it can be really genuinely distressing for autism spectrum kids. So it reminds me a bit when we used to do circle tones back in the day, and I don't know if anybody's experienced this, but the facilitator would go around and make everybody state their feeling before starting. I don't know, do I live in a different world?
No.
Yes.
And it was awful, and I wouldn't participate in that, because to me that was completely inappropriately intrusive. Why should I share my feelings with you? But the pronoun thing feels the same to me, that it's intrusive on my own privacy. I don't have pronouns. What do you mean? It intrudes too much into my personal life for it to be appropriate.
There's a one-sentence thing there, which is that one of the things that sometimes works to shut it all down is to say, this is very pressurizing for people who are questioning their gender identity to ask everyone to declare their pronouns.
Yeah. I think Wesley has a question.
I'm such a big mouth, I need to shut up.
We're coming towards the end now. As we're coming towards the end, I want to remind everybody we're doing a live stream of Gender Wider Lens tonight at 7. Yes?
Hi, Wesley Yang. I'm an independent journalist. You've spoken of the pronoun police as a group of busybodies that you may encounter at work or on social media. But
you've gone, mic's gone.
No, it's
okay.
right now.
It's back, yeah. Back.
Is it on again?
Yeah.
All right. I want to ask about the pronoun police when they become the state. And we think about the U.S. context. We both have a First Amendment and a right to free conscience that some courts have protected, but we also have a civil rights apparatus that, through the mechanism of the concept of the hostile environment, which was sort of created in order to protect women against sexual harassment, being repurposed, right, to protect the person whose preferred pronoun is meant to be, indicative of their true self, that is, their authentic self, that is being disrespected and discriminated against if it is not, if it's not used. So we have some teachers that have refused to use preferred pronouns, but they're not misgendering, but they are not using preferred pronouns, and the courts have said it's okay, that we're not going to compel them for this purpose. And then the other question is, like, when it is the state, and I know that other countries that don't have a First Amendment, Canada in particular, have been much more, right, have been much less restrained about just saying it's against the law not to use "zer" or whatever is the preferred pronoun on the one hand. And then, of course, there's this other question of what I refer to as the kind of administrative Borg, that is a form of non-electoral politics, of institutional capture, where you're simply not going to be able to interact with, because of the way intake forms, right, many crucial social institutions, without declaring an identity. All they have to do is create a drop-down menu that doesn't have a prefer not to say. I think most of them do still have this kind of residual prefer not to say option, but at some point they're probably going to remove it. And so I want to think about it in those two contexts, about like, it seems to be the case that this regime, referring to not just the state, but the larger architecture of power by which we access various benefits that we get from states and corporations, seem to be moving inexorably toward just designing a world where it is not possible to not declare your gender identity.
Yeah. Can I?
Yeah, please do.
So I know the UK legal framework, but I think it's relatively similar everywhere. It's the conflict between freedom of speech and freedom of belief, which includes the freedom to not speak, not say something, and not believe something, and hostile environment, discrimination. Any form of words that you use can be harassment. Forms of words that are true, calling someone, you're divorced, you're fat, you're a woman, those things may well be true, and they may well be things that you need to say in some situations, but if you say them excessively in any situation, they can be harassment. So you can't ever draw a clear line that says this form of words is always okay and it's never harassment, or this form of words is always harassment. And I think there will be more and more court cases to try and find that line. If you want to be a test case, have at it. But I wouldn't recommend it.
I think you need a T-shirt if you want to be a test case.
There will be brave people who do that, and the line, I think, the places where it's going to be tested is particularly where people's jobs relate to children and vulnerable people, because those are the places where, if you're working in a shop and the norm is use someone's preferred pronoun because that's polite. you're not saying that you believe something about them. You're not affirming them in their identity. You don't have a relationship with them, so it means less. You can do it because it means less. But if you're their teacher or their therapist or their doctor or their parent, it means more. It's more important, and the ability to say no should be protected.
Okay, we're going to finish up. We'll just let one last comment from everybody. And
Are you sure? I was just going to say we probably ought to finish up.
We really
That'd
should.
be my comment, I'd say.
Yeah, we just have one.
There's
one last comment.
There's one thing I wanted to say, because I felt as if maybe Helen and I had slagged off the gender critical pronoun police a little bit, and I would say on the other hand that I think it's fair enough for women, feminists, people who are gender critical to feel really strongly about it, because the one thing we didn't talk about, we talked a lot about kids, but there's a lot of adults who insist, oh, you must use my pronoun, and that's where it's the autogenophilic sort of fetish part of it, where you will say my female pronouns, and I can understand why the gender critical pronoun police feel strongly about that.
I mean, I object to it because I think that there's people, especially people who are anonymous on Twitter, and there's people I'm very good friends with who are anonymous on Twitter. I don't object to that, but there's people who are literally saying to me, who changed jobs, who wrote a book, who put myself out there to be called a neo-Nazi, and it is not fun. And those people then pop up and complain about the fact that in order to get my book published, I had to use pronouns a few times. I mean, for God's sake, get some sense of proportion.
Me too. Yeah, here.
Point on which to leave it, I think.
Can I not do my pronoun joke?
Do your pronoun joke.
Oh yeah, pronoun joke to finish off the day.
How do non-binary ninjas kill people?
How?
They/them.
Boom! Very good. So
thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for today.
I'm staying.
Yeah, it's been really wonderful.